So I'm working on a couple of figures here in Procreate, and I wanted to show you just this little simple technique kind of for checking yourself. So you know the feeling where you're here and you're sort of noodling around on these details. Everything is going well, but then you sort of end up feeling like, oh, something is wrong. I don't know why. It doesn't look right. I don't know why. Well, and then the way you address that kind of is by, maybe zooming in on the eye and redrawing it and everything like that. But that feeling usually doesn't have to do with any of the details you're working on. It has to do with the overall structure. So one simple thing you can do to check, right, is take the parts of the human body that are symmetrical on both sides and just draw a line through them and make sure that all those lines line up, right? So for example, I'm working on this shoulder, I work really hard on it, right? And so I draw these quick lines on a new layer. The bright color, I just draw it pretty quickly. That's not exactly right. Something like that. So here's on the chest, making sure those shapes line up, right? And then everything, it's really, really hard to have your torso differently aligned than your hips. So here's kind of a line that's parallel for the waist. Here's kind of a line for the meaning of the legs. And even the elbows, if it's a super dramatic position if a person has one elbow really high and one elbow really low. So mostly in your everyday gestures, your elbows are also aligned. All right, the knees also have that symmetrical thing. Even in this position, they are, in this position, the legs are a little bit spread, right? So they're in a kind of a different alignment. But in general, the hips align, the knees align, the elbows align, right? And now once you have that, so here's what I'm talking about, right? Once you have that, and then you're thinking about this neckline, for instance, the curve of that neckline should follow that seam diagonal, right? Just like that. So even though the edge of her shirt is curved, it sort of follows that same diagonal approximately. Let's see. Yeah, when you're drawing the scoop of that neck, you think of it just wrapping around that line. Now there's some things that are, not making sense in this drawing. So according to my rule, see, her elbow should be here, right? And then her elbow actually, in the drawing, because I was working so much on the details, I put the elbow actually here. So that would make this kind of line, which doesn't make sense. So what I need to do, even though the shape is just shadowy, I need to draw a little path for myself, put her elbow up a little higher, right? All right. Now, moving on to the face, I can see kind of the way that I've drawn it. The details this looks right to me when I zoom in, right? But I always want to check it if something feels off. Yeah, and you can tell this isn't very refined. It's not very detailed, but the alignment really works. So the drawing holds together and it seems realistic. All right, so now if I connect the eyes, and now I draw a line for the base of the nose, I draw a line for the lips, I draw a line for the chin, for the eyebrows, forehead. Make sure that those are all lined up as well, right? Now something's off here because these lines don't match the lines that I have used to construct the rest of the body. So I need to check myself. Is that possible? Yeah, it just means that she's tilting her head a little bit, right? So I can sort of construct, maybe like this little cubic cage, right? That sort of shows me how her head is. Okay, so if I think of that, oh wait, I think I got this wrong. I think it's a little more tilted like this. Yeah. Okay, so there's the front of her head. Just to give me sort of, a sense of what's happening here. So with all this, I feel like I should be able to see under her chin, and I can't in my drawing, right? It's sort of the line between her chin and her neck is really harsh. So that shows me that I need to redraw it a little bit, just so when I'm looking up at the chin, there's that little surface there, right? And since I figured out this sort of cube that would hold her head, I can see that, I might be tempted to line up the ear and put it right here. But in reality, this is the front surface, and then the tilt of her head means that these lines are sort of going down. So I use the ear as being lined up with the nose. I say the ear is in alignment with the nose, but I also have to acknowledge that the head, right around the cheekbone, it has this area where, as a shape, it sort of goes around a corner. So you have to be able to draw that corner as well. So I think in reality, the ear is going to be here. So that's what's wrong with my drawing, right? When I turn it off, let me just turn this layer off. Okay. So when I turn this off, I now realize that I'm actually looking up at her face, but I don't see any surface under there, right? So really there needs to be, there needs to be that surface right there, or just a hint of it. Let me get back to it. Just like that, just to show that I'm looking up at her, as I know I am, right? I mean, this drawing was passable. I could have gotten away without doing that, but adding that little sense of shape and structure and understanding it just makes it more real. So, once I work through this, we'll have a much more realistic sense of how she's tilting her head, right? She's tilting her head a little bit back from our view so we can see just a little small area of the underside of her chin, right? And now all of a sudden it looks a little more natural, a little less cut out. Like when you're learning art, people always focus on color, but color, application, all that stuff doesn't really seem to matter. Like one thing that I was always told was never to use black lines, and I use black lines all the time, right? But what really matters is structure more than anything. So if something is feeling wrong, it's never the details, it's just the overall structure. All right, so as you can see here, I was able to figure out a lot just logically, right? Just by going back to my drawing and drawing little cubes around things and being logical and saying, like, the two eyes are not in different positions on the face, so they have to line up on a line. The shoulders have to line up on a line. Her neckline has to line up on a line. Her belt has to line up on a line. And then extending that to the elbows, like as much play as there would be between these elbows. This part is pretty dynamic. So you could say that there is, the elbows are in motion. There's a ton of play, right? But that play would be maybe if you think of a arc going through the line here, this or something, then that play would put the elbow here, right? By focusing on the detail, I accidentally ended up with this really long arm and the elbow's down here, right? So that's one of the things that even if you can't define it as a viewer because you're not into drawing or something, you will sense it and you will sense that it's wrong. But if you take the time to do some structure work and get it right, then you'll realize that you are, oh gosh, just so immensely free. Like my lines aren't very straight. They're always scruffy. I always draw in black. But I also work really hard on this kind of like logical geometry. And I think that once you get the logic of your figure in place, then the strokes don't matter that much. And then you can kind of breathe a sigh of relief, and then paint it however you want. And if things are positioned in the right place, they'll be believable. Oops. Okay, so while we're doing it, yeah. So here's another figure, and this just has those same issues, right? And you can see I haven't really worked through this. It's just in silhouette, but when I sketch over it, it's really hard to keep track of the length of the elbow, especially when the elbow is hidden behind the torso, right? But so you can see right here, I drew an elbow. That's a pretty good elbow. But when I do this kind of study and I draw all of my parallel lines, these are the shoulder blades. The shoulder blades should line up. These are the shoulders. Shoulders could line up, need to line up. You can see that I have this elbow here on this line. This arm is straight down, right? And yet somehow this elbow is all the way down here, right? That wasn't right. So I need to adjust that length, right? Yep. So that's looking good. So gosh, I don't know very much about anatomy. And my approach to it is always in these kind of basic shapes. But what makes it believable, and you can study muscle structure and stuff like that, and you definitely would really benefit from it. But if you just want a believable drawing where, it kind of feels real, it's not in the detail, it's not in the strokes. With anatomy, it's really just in where things are positioned. That's all. And your viewer will subconsciously notice that one elbow is too long, even if they can't express it. And unless you do this kind of work in a really thoughtful way, you'll subconsciously notice that too. And you'll say, there's something wrong with my drawing, I just don't know what it is. And then in order to fix it, you'll go back and rework the face or rework the details, and you'll forget to rework the structure. Okay, so that's all I have for you, but it's a huge tip. Just if you're working on the figure, just go through things that are aligned and draw these parallel lines and make sure that they all line up along the same axis, right? Because it doesn't make sense for some of them to be misaligned, for some of them to have one alignment and others to have their own alignment. Not in the case of the head, though, because the head can tilt, so the head can have its own alignment. But even, something like, look at the crappiness of this rendering. I'm not trying to draw a really photorealistic pair of shorts here, but because these are, because the hem of the shorts is basically in the right place, then the viewer will fill in everything that they need from those minor details. The structure is what makes it believable and satisfying. All right, so that is it for today. Hope that's helpful.